So right before we start the video, I just want to mention that a lot of the clips in the video have been scuffed over by my editing system and are actually don't show up or will show up as like a blank image. So there's like a couple of weird augmentations in the videos of the edits. That's going to be me, and there is quite a lot of them in the video, so I'm just warning you for basically future notice so you know what you're jumping into. Now we move on to the final section of Warhammer 40k's faction, the Xenos faction. We've gone from people serving the Emperor of Man and trying to succeed into the human race, and to people who serve the Dark Gods and are being corrupted by their own souls and are trying to just basically destroy the Emperor's reign and let the Dark Gods just control the universe, I would imagine anyway. And now we're moving on to the alien races. The alien races who serve their own purpose, their own fruition, and have their own intention of living inside this galaxy, and are fighting for their own exact reasons that many people either don't know or are too long to explain. So let's jump into it with our very first Xenos. The first army we're going to be in Xenos is going to be the Elder, or I like to call them the Ums, for a very specific reason I think many of you already know. Basically, the Elder are a dying race who made a deal with Slaanesh, who are trying to run away from Slaanesh, and are basically living on a massive mothership up in space, and basically take the enemy's souls, or take their own souls when they die, put them in soul gems so that the ancestors are able to continue living out through battle inside of the ship. And because they're a dying race, they're trying to protect their homeworld at all costs, because if the ship is destroyed, then all of their souls will go to Slaanesh, and they'll live a continuous corruption. They'll basically go to super hell, which isn't the best example. But how they play in the game. Basically, they like to run up fast, guns blitzing. They like to shoot so much, but not be exactly the most tankiest unit in the game, and basically be what the equivalent to a glass cannon is. Lots of firepower, fast movement, weird movement shenanigans, but very easy to kill in the long run. Now, what are their strengths? Okay, I'm getting this out of the way. They have the best stratagem in the game, which is Phantasm. Basically, allowing you to move 7 inches at the end of the opponent's movement turn and just do whatever they want. So, another one is like Fire and Fey, which allows you to make it like, which allows you to just make like, basically make a normal move in response to like the enemy shooting, and you can just like kind of like reposition yourself, which is absolutely incredible. And the ability to do Phantasm, which is just like casually move 7 inches whenever you feel like it, is fantastic. So Elder really like working into movement shenanigans. They love moving around the board in weird ways you don't expect to trick the enemy to force maybe a strange shot, so they can really get in there with their long range weapons, with like their fire warriors or like their sentinel units, and they can get like just being really, or their knight, what they call the wraith something, the big units basically they're running. Now, the army rule Strands of Fate is similar to the idea of miracle dice for the sister battle. Basically, you roll a selected number of dice in that front, and then as the game progresses, you gain the dice back by doing certain tasks, and as that happens, you can select certain dice to switch out. So if you want something to really, really work, let's just say that your avatar of Khan or Quran, I keep forgetting his name, but like the avatar of Dark need to hit the attacks, and then all of a sudden they didn't make. Oh, whoopsies, you can get the fate dice, chuck them in, all of a sudden does crazy damage, and you do really, really well. So the fate dice work really, really well in terms of just like making the army better through just general great just abilities, because suddenly you've got the ability to do crazy amounts of Overwatch with your amazing firepower, because you have the long range firepower ability, and you can just push in really, really well, which is just insane. And you have units like they have insane units in general, like the Incarn, who can just like teleport whenever an enemy dies. So if an enemy dies over there, he teleports over there, boom, he's just there, and every time a unit dies, he just keeps teleporting back and forth, which is just insane, along with things like their regular their fire warriors and some of their biker units. And the avatar is also insane, and they got plenty of just high firepower units who are delivering this insane amount of damage throughout the game. And no matter how much you push forward with things like Phantasm and the ability to resurrect characters through like the soul gem enhancement, or giving a 2-up invulnerable save. It's basically just like, I don't know. You're doing very, very good in what was this? You're doing very, very good in terms of like having abilities to do a lot of damage and then come back with even more damage. So you're able to resurrect, do better with shooting, and just perform like that. They're also they're super powerful in terms of like you don't expect they want to do. So what you want them to do, they're most likely not to do it. So suddenly they've got a lot of mobility in terms of like their bikers, their wraith knights, their the Incarn, the Avatar, their Fire Warriors, all of them. You can use Phantasm, you can Strike and Fade, you can use Strands of Fate on them, and it's very easy to like position yourself in specific matters that forces the enemy to work with you, so you can eventually overpower them and just absolutely desolate them with your insane amounts of shooting. Now, what are their weaknesses? They're very strong in shooting, but when it comes to melee, they're kind of meh. And they still can be quite good. They have designated melee units, but their shooting is still what they're really good at. And when it comes to the shooting, they are glass cannons. So once they're being shot at, it's very likely that they will die. But in terms of the weaknesses, once again, with all their movement shenanigans and the abilities to just manipulate Overwatch and just fate dice really well, like, you're not really taking much on. So I believe that Eldar rising their arm is because they have so many abilities to manipulate the game in so many ways that make it work for them.
So
simply
just
with overpowered units like the Avatar
I
and the Incarn,
had a
and just
hard time
allowing
researching
you
these guys
as
because they're quite played
that
not
is the
so
Eldar.
often. It
If
was
you're
quite
looking at
hard to
playing
find
a very
information on them. They're
movement
related to like their
army
play
who
style and
just
how
wants
they
to throw out
exactly
different
work. So there's still lots of
things like
information on them,
Fire
but
Warriors and
not as much
Incarns
as
and
other
weird
factions
special
you'll see in the
abilities, then
Xenos
this is
area.
going to be the army for you. But who is going to be the next Xenos army on the list? Next up is going to be Drew. Or as I call them, the Melee Elder. Basically, these version of Eldar thought that the only way to escape Slanesh was to simply just, well, sacrifice other souls instead of saving their own souls. So they would go on massive amounts of raiding parties, torturing and experimenting innocent souls and sparing their own souls by sacrificing the lives of these innocent people. Now, how do they play on the actual tabletop? Basically, get as many buffs from the pain tokens as possible, and then kill as many units as possible without dying from their fragile ass units. Now, what do their strength works? They have a very, very interesting game mechanic, which is the power of pain, which basically gives them pain tokens, allowing them to spend those tokens on things like full hit rerolls, full wound rerolls, reroll charge rolls, just being basically just the things you want to get in melee with. So it's going to be a lot easier for them to uphold the idea of their melee army while getting in there. And they've got plenty of characters' abilities to weapon. They basically got characters' abilities of ways to earn pain tokens faster through like things that might come up in terms of what they're running. I do have a couple of good strategies, was like being able to move after you shoot, but honestly, that's really it for the Drukhari in terms. Basically, they're just a very melee-centricated Eldar army who is going to be looking heavily into getting huge buffs from pain tokens and then performing very well under small amounts of pressure. Now, if you like the sound of that army, then I would imagine Drukhari would be for you. Now, what are their weaknesses? Basically, they're very, very weak. They're even more fragile than Eldar is, and they're just honestly not really looking at many abilities to move around that factor. So even though they are a melee unit, it can be very hard for them to actually get in there because of like their transports and their abilities. To run all their melee units, it's also quite expensive, and it can be an annoying pain to have them. And they can be played at a good level, but they're niche situations of their pain tokens, and their attachment rule, which kind of sucks basically, can make it very hard to play. But if you are looking at kind of playing a more melee-focused Eldar, where you focus on getting pain tokens and using those pain tokens to become better through melee, then my friend Drukhari might be for you. Let's move on to the next Xenos army.
Next up is going to be Tyranids, or the Endless Swarm of Nonsense. Basically, a group of very, 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 very large biomass is being controlled by a singular hive mind, a psychotic presence in any world that Tyranids are over. Basically, the whole goal is to consume any biomass found anywhere in the world, stripping the soil of nutrients itself until the planet becomes a dense wasteland of simple nonsense. Then the hive mind moves on to other planets, corrupting them until the entire universe is nothing but a big grey rock. Now, that's how they basically work in the world. They're basically the worst enemy anything could have. When Tyranids enter, like I said, have a whole Space Marine faction for it, so they're a big, big problem. Now, how they play in the actual game. Tyranids love rushing the board with huge amounts of units. They are probably the biggest horde unit in the game, and they love having large amounts of Hormagaunts, Tormagaunts, Leapers, anything they can get up the board really, really fast with, and just endlessly swarm the enemy, and love tabling like 1,000 to even 2,000 point games very, very easily. Now, they do have a codex, which means they have plenty of detachments they can run with. They've got the Crusher Stampede. They've got what? They've got the Crusher Stampede. They've got the Endless Swarm. They've got the Psychic one. They've got the one that works on Infiltrator, and they've got plenty of different ways of playing Tyranids now. So you have plenty of different options to work with. But basically, the army rule, which is synapses, allows you basically to just be better at doing. Basically allows you to be better at performing battle shock tests. So if your unit is within 6 inches of a synaptic unit, they have to roll 3d6 for a battle shock instead of 2d6. And the Shadows of the Warp ability basically allows you to send out a massive surge of psychic energy, forcing a battle shock test over every single enemy unit that you have to fight. Basically, it's like the hive mind is a presence among the thing, constantly building psychic energy amok with a Tyranid and then releasing it in a big shockwave, forcing the entire enemy unit to take a battle shock test, or making battle shock whole loss easier for them. So when going up against things like Chaos Knights, or things that are going to flip battle shock, these guys are very good at dealing with. Now, they tend to be quite close range, but they do have a lot of option for being decently far range, like things like the Biovores and the Tyrannofexes, the Carnifexes, some of their Maliceptors to an extent, and they're a lot larger, more shootier units, like maybe the Hormagaunts in terms of mid-range combat. Basically, you're looking at more running these like high range, like in combat enemies, things like Hive Guard, things like regular Hormagaunts, things like Tyranid Warriors, things like the Hive Guards with wings, the Hive Guard Prime, or the Hive Guard Prime, I keep forgetting his name, but the Hive Guard Tyrant, or anything that's going to be running in close range combat, you're going to be wanting to move into them. And they got plenty of wills to like balance around the idea of melee. So basically, if you want to run like a huge swarmy army, but have multiple ways to go with like a Monster Mash, a more like horde kind of unit, a psychic unit, or maybe a more infiltrator based unit, you've got plenty of ways to play Tyranids. And if you really like the idea of countering Battle Shock and sending Battle Shock out and running endless, basically huge swarms of melee based mid-range-ish combat units, then Tyranids are a great option for you. They also have a very large, very large indexed. So you're looking at plenty of units to select from, ranging from, just like I said, Hormagaunts, Tormagaunts, Maliceptors, Carnifexes, Tyrannofexes, Xenothropes, Biovores, anything like that. Plenty of units you can throw in there and do tons and tons of effectiveness with. So if you're looking at playing a semi-ish psychic army, you're going to be looking at focus firing on large amounts of swarms, overwhelming the enemy, and potentially even swarming them to complete table, then maybe Tyranids are your go-to. Now, their weaknesses is that they do struggle with high toughness. Similar to how most horde armies would work, it's kind of hard to go up against them when they got like this high toughness. So you're looking at a very kind of weaker army. It's going to be looking at lots of units, but the quality of getting those units are definitely quite low. And their more powerful units are going to be generally monsters and are going to be vehicles, so giving up Bring It Down can be quite a pain for these guys, but you can do decently well with them. And I don't really know, just their infantry is really all that you're going to be running in terms of, like, if you're running like the endless swarm or the monster mash, with the monster mash kind of meh, but the infantry swarm is going to be a lot of what you're running. So if you're willing to run a lot of infantry units and have like tons and tons and tons of, and paint tons and tons of units and build tons and tons of units, then Tyranids might be your go-to, my friend. But yeah, that's Tyranids. Basically, so much just overwhelming forces of psychic energy and melee attacks is going to run the enemy down as much as it possibly can. But yeah, that's Tyranids. So let's move on to the next army of Xenos. Now we move on to the Gene Stealer cult, or from the sewers, the Crackheads come. Basically, this army is in the government. They're throughout society. They believe the Imperium is a work you to the bone place to live, and are trying to basically rebel against them. In return, they believe the Tyranids will one day save them. When return the savior does come down, it will eat all of them in just term of biomass, which they don't not realize yet. But the Gene Stealer cults believe that and are just slowly working their way through the government to become more corrupt and just swarming the entire planet with more and more forces against their cult. But basically, how they play it on the tabletop. Basically, once you die, you're coming back anyway. That's how Gene Stealers work, my friend. Now, in the actual game, these armies use strategic reserve more than any other army in the game. They're constantly going in and out depending on how you operate through them. Plenty of hunt estrangement strategies and enhancements work around this. Basically, the army rule, which is called ambush, allows you to place a specific basically allows you to roll 1d6 and add 3 if you are a battle line, and then your unit becomes a cult ambush unit basically. And once that cult ambush unit basically lives, you're able to put like a token, a cult ambush token, where they die. And if the enemy moves in with a certain range of that token, that unit can now come back in return of that. So suddenly you push up with this unit, they become very heavily shot, you place down a bunch of ambush tokens all over the CP, and suddenly they have to come back in return from strategic reserve. And suddenly you're looking at a very, very powerful unit that can, like, things like infantry units, like the hybrids, the neophyte hybrids, can continuously come back round after round and score those points. No matter how much you throw at them, they're going to keep on pushing forward. And like I said, the neophyte hybrids are an incredible unit to have tons and tons of stacks on to move up and deal with them. And they also have a nice tunnel crawls and stratagem, which allows you to deep strike 3 inches away. So things that are staying in strategic reserve are coming in quite fast and are not going to be looking at a painful situation. And you have plenty of abilities to gain strategic reserve and gain sustained hits if you are from strategic reserve with a detachment rule. Basically, Gene Stealer cult are an army that focuses heavily on dying and then coming back in a different situation. You're coming back in terms of forcing your enemy to make decisions and forcing movement, otherwise your enemy is going to be coming back and you'll be constantly scoring points. So if you like the idea of constantly coming back from reinforcement stages and forcing the enemy to make movement-based decisions, because otherwise your cult ambush tokens are going to be coming back even stronger, then I believe Gene Stealer cult is going to be for you. And if you also enjoy the idea of maybe not hitting the hardest, but playing very much into ambush and creating this kind of weird strategic understanding, I believe Gene Stealer cult will be for you. Now, what are their weaknesses? Sometimes their cult ambush can be very, very niche. Sometimes the ability to drop down and be where you need to be can be very niche, because the enemy is able to kill you in a way that benefits them and not you. And the range is only 9 inches, so if you're versing like a long range army, it can be annoying to get all those units back, especially if you place them in a way that was supposed to get killed. And to actually add on to that, a lot of their stratagems and enhancements are okay, but are probably some more the weaker in the game, in my personal opinion, and have not necessarily ability to really work well within their cult ambush. And I would also say that Overwatch is just generally a big counter for them, as when they're coming back, the enemy is easily able to spend a CP, because technically it was a movement, to be able to instantly just Overwatch them and just destroy them in any way possible. But that's what I believe they do. And if you are looking at playing Gene Stealer cult, it is fine, but these weaknesses would be a big factor. Basically, if you enjoy the idea of ambushing your opponent, coming in from deep strike, and just positioning yourself in a way that forces movement control, then Gene Stealer cults might be for you. But let's move on to the next Xenos army. Now we are moving on to the Leagues of Votan, or the Rock and Stone, if you get the reference. Basically, Leagues of Votan are highly adaptable, advanced subhumans who have multiple trade alliances to basically protect their mining industry, who they're simply doing for the profit. And they basically look out for number one, and if you kill one of their kin, as they call them, they really, really don't like you. Now, how do they play into the army? Basically, they blast you down with high firepower weapons and encourage you to do lots of damage to them so they can deliver even more damage back. So, the strength of the Votan. Basically, they're very, very good at shooting. Now, they don't really have necessarily like very good long-range shooting, but the shooting they do provide is super high density, going in with like strength 8, strength 6, coming in with AP -2 most of the majority of the time, and having good damage 3 weapons is going to be a fantastic effect at like really delivering the pack-a-punch. Like some of the things like the Hearthguard Warriors and the Thunderkin are very good at delivering that pack-a-punch that the Leagues of Votan love to deliver. Now, the army ability is the Eyes of the Ancestor, and basically it gives judgment tokens based on if the enemy kills you. So, if the enemy kills a unit of Leagues of Votan characters or units, whatever they kill, that unit gains a judgment token. One judgment token means that the enemy is -1 to hit, -1 to hit. I believe it's, -1 to hit, and if they have 2 judgment tokens, they kill 2 units, suddenly that is -1 to hit and -1 to wound. So as slowly the unit starts to kill your unit, you become even more aggressive against them and you start blasting them to absolute bits. So if you really enjoy the idea of doing that, it can be super, super fun to watch. Like you're slowly just like watching watching your enemy melt in front of you as they start attacking you, because they become -1 to hit and -1 to wound. We're going up against large squads of Hearthguard warriors. You're most likely to get melted to absolute pieces. Now, they're also a very tanky, slow-moving army, but because of that, they've got plenty of range options to make up for that. And once they need to get in the position they do, they don't actually generally need to move, especially with the abilities to get the Void Armor, which gives you like like a 4-up invulnerable save, and the ability to have the Grim Demeanor enhancement, which gives the ability to ignore all modifiers to a specific character. Suddenly you become a very tanky unit who's sitting there and doing absolutely whatever they feel like doing, which is absolutely fantastic in terms of, well, if you need to shoot. Sitting on an OC point is very helpful for them, allowing them to just position themselves in different ways and create nice diversity in terms of what you're bringing. Now, they do have some movement units like their Votan Bikers and like their Sagittor, but most of the time you're going to be moving pretty slow with things like your Thunderkin or your Hearthguard Warriors. They have plenty of abilities to give like instantaneously like 2 judgment tokens or 1 judgment token, so the flexibility you have with their Grim Demeanor ability is very high, I would recommend. So if you really enjoy the idea of like singling out units slowly but surely and melting them with firepower that maybe isn't insanely overpowered, but you have multiple flexible options of choosing with them and have huge mobs of just crazy amounts of damage, then Leagues of Votan probably with you. They're probably like a really neat, calm, organized army that's very good at just like, if you kill their kin, they will kill you basically. So if you like that kind of idea, the analogy they go with, then I would highly recommend Leagues of Votan. Now, the weaknesses is that they are quite slow, and so they can easily be like kind of like counter-tabled. So like you have a fast army, it's very easy for that army to move up, take all the points, and then kind of like slowly whittle down the Leagues of Votan if they also have counteracting good shooting, which most of the time they don't. But the thing is that it's very easy to also keep them in the deployment zone if necessarily like they get stuck, which can very well happen thanks to their slow movement. And they also don't have a lot of invulnerable saves, so devastating wounds, lethal hits, having high amounts of AP is going to be a really big negative for them. So coming into that really tough shooting, melee, or anything, along with them not really having the best melee besides characters, can be a little bit annoying. But yeah, that is Leagues of Votan, squatty little boys who are coming in, shooting up with high melter flamer guns. But yeah, that's Leagues of Votan. Now let's move on to the next Xenos faction. The next faction is going to be the Necrons, or shoot me, see what happens. Basically, they used to control I would imagine, run the universe a long, long time back, but wanted to exist forever. And they basically wanted to live forever, and so they made deals with the star gods, who are gods of like nature, of the stars, and to make them immortal. While making them immortal, they were turned into feelingless robotic machines who can never die but will simply always remain emotionless, except for some of the more leader generals who have some of their emotions still intact. Because of this, they got mad and they imprisoned the Catan in forms of breaking them up into shards and imprisoning their power so they can no longer be used, and they control the Catan instead of the Catan controlling them. Now they are an endless dying swarm who is looking to wreak havoc against the people who once wronged them, and is looking at basically retaking over the galaxy in terms of controlling all the worlds they once were. But how will they play in the actual game? Basically, you stay on an objective, and you stay on that objective. Basically, the whole point of Necron is that you do not die. Is that you sit on the objective and you do not die. They may not be the most durable army in sense of the stats, but when it comes to durability in general, they are very, 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 very durable. They're also a very, very good army to paint in terms of all you really need is silver, a bit of yellow, and some kind of non-metallic metal aspects you can place on them if you're an advanced painter. So if you're looking for an advanced or maybe a minor job, you can do that. Basically, the army rule is the reanimation protocol, basically allowing you to heal up to D3 wounds per each model who needs healing, or you can return a selected model if that model needs to be selectively returned. Basically, you can just continuously keep bringing back your Necrons and healing them to full strength, allowing them to sit on a point the entire game. So, playing a game against Necrons is like basically playing a huge, slow, long game. But most of the time, it is quite fun considering you're playing an actual full game against an army that's not going to die. So basically, you're trading fire back, allowing your army to stay alive. And they have, obviously, still have options for damage. The damage isn't incredible, but things like the, things like the big blobs of warriors and the big blobs of Lich Guard is what you're going to be wanting taking in terms of survivability. Most Necron armies are taking large squads of Lich Guard or large squads of warriors in terms of like resurrecting them and keeping that, and then combining them with things like the Cryptex or the Reanimators to give them big buffs against shooting, or big buffs in general, and then allowing them to constantly reanimate can be super, super, super helpful. And you still have things who can do damage, like the destroyers and the canoptic units, and especially with their actual attachment that came out, the canoptic court, and plenty of things to be able to teleport and do more melee. You have plenty of options to build Necrons in the way you want. But I would generally think of the way you're mainly building them is with large squads of units who are not going to die. So if you really enjoy the idea of having this army that's just not going to die, this zombie death walking army that you can set up the board and know they're not going to die, even know how much the army is going to try, then then Necrons might be just for you. Their weaknesses, I would believe, would be that they were very set in stone playstyle, and that is that you need to not die. With the reanimation protocol, you can build for damage, but most of the time you're going to be building for the factors of staying alive. They do have some designated melee units, but those units are quite meh in terms of like the destroyers. They can do good, but like you're more building for the fact of like, okay, I want to exist for the longest time possible. And they also don't really win fistfights. Now when I say fistfights, I don't mean like, okay, actual melee battles. I mean fistfights as in like back and forth shooting or back and forth melee. They usually don't win those battles where it comes to just like a full-on, just like duke out fight. And so if you're looking at maybe surviving with them, it can be quite bad. And their damage output, like I said, isn't amazing, besides from like specific units like the Canoptic Court units, but like I said, you're mainly building for that. But yeah, the only really bad thing about Necrons is that you're building for a specific reason, but if you really enjoy the idea of like consistently staying alive, consistently having these units to like come back with, maybe shoot into the enemy with, have some decently good damage, then Necrons might be for you. But let's move on to the second last Xenos army. Now we move on to the second last Xenos army, which is the Tau. Or, as I like to call them, what is this melee you speak of? Now, the Tau are a very young, innovative, constructive race who love the idea of building large mech suits and continuously grinding through the battles of shooting, basically. They love long-range firefights and controlling large mech suits to wipe the enemy out with high energy energy blasters and high energy rifles. They've innovated many different ways of informative things, whether that be through air blasting fragment projectiles or homing missile pods you can track on the enemy. It's very easy for them to outshoot anything they are faced up against and destroy anything that they need to destroy. Now, what is the actual Tau? How they play in the game? Basically, you are able to table the opponent, listen to me, table the opponent with pure shooting alone. That's how Tau is going to play. Their biggest strength in the actual game is that they're going to be huge into shooting. Tau is naturally going to be this big shooting army that's going to focus heavily on delivering this high volume of fire into the enemy with high amounts of strength, and consistently gain all ranges, from long range being with like Storm Surge and broadsides and a bit of Riptide, to your short range being with more like your commanders and battle suits and your crisis suits who have like the 18-inch range with like the flamers and the melter guns, and you have a decently good range impact from like having 72 inches to even 18 inches. And basically that army rule is for the greater good, meaning that basically, which is really cool, you can choose to team up units with each other. Basically one unit becomes the guided unit and one unit becomes the observer unit, and once the guided unit shoots the observer unit selected target, it gets a -1 to ballistic skill, and if the observer unit has the marker like keyword, it gains the ballistic skill and the ignores cover keyword. So basically, they work together in unison to create better shooting for the whole of the army, basically for the greater good of the army, allowing you to get better shooting in total. So you having immense amount of high volume firepower shooting into this thing. They also have some great stratagems and attachments, which allows you to sustain hits from round 3 onwards. So all you have to do is survive for that good amount of time until you get like this overwhelming firepower, and then the ability to move and shoot, have a 6-up feel no pain, and have decently good access to the ability of embarking in transports, even if you are like not in a specific range of transport. It's also very helpful for things like strike squads and breach teams who are looking at pushing up. But Tau are very, very good at like being this good, and they also very heavily work into mech suits and big walkers. So if you really enjoy the idea of like kind of like, I know it's a little bit cliche, but anime walking Gundam suits who are coming in, charging in with these large pulse rifle blasters that are going to be able to shoot down the enemy with immense amounts of firepower, then Tau, my friend, might be for you. They've also got some really, really cool units, things like the Ghost Guild, the Riptide, the Storm Surge, the Battle Suits, Commander Farsight, Commander Shadowstone, even the Broadside, all look really cool units, and you can paint them in very different ways, from completely red to completely green to completely in the middle with a nice white coat you can dint up with weathering to make it look even better. But Tau is a really, really nice army if you're looking to heavily get into shooting and become so good at this form. Now, what are some of the weaknesses that Tau carry along with them? Now, they're probably the only army in the game that doesn't have any melee whatsoever. They have a couple of melee stuff, but 99% of the damage they're going to be doing is going to be doing in the shooting phase. So, if you're looking at playing a melee army, do not play Tau. But if you're looking at playing a shooting army, play Tau. Also, they have generally weaker units in terms of like save ability and toughness. They have good ways of like making like good strong units, but like the ability to actually survive high AP, high strength damage can be quite bad. So long range sniper shots can really deal very heavy damage into them in terms of like basically just wiping them out slowly but surely. And generally strong, but when you only really have one good thing about you, which is the shooting, they can find workarounds. So if you are happy to give up all that in terms of having workarounds, and you really like the idea of running a bunch of mech suits and shooting them up with a bunch of blazing fire, then Tau might be for you. But let's move on to the very last Xenos faction, which, in my opinion, is the best faction in the entire goddamn game. And that's going to be the Orcs. And I believe the Orcs are the best goddamn faction in the game, have the coolest miniatures, the coolest attachments, the coolest enhancements, and the coolest just general full stop. Now the reason I'm not talking about them in this video is because I've talked about them so many times in previous videos. So if you do want to learn more about Orcs and actually have a full in-depth guide about them, you go check out some of my older videos, like my full Orc guide, or when I reviewed my entire Orc list in one of my new previous videos. But yes, that is going to be the entire video Oh man, that's some damn recording I had to do there. But I enjoy this so much, creating all these lists, explaining all these armies to you guys, and I hope you really got a lot of value out of it, and have actually helped to choose an army based off my information I've given. But yes, that's going to be all me today, and I hope, and I really hope I catch you in the next one.